And I don't tell anyone in the book what your values should be, okay? You tell me. But if you have any values at all other than enriching shareholders, if you care about your employees, you care about your customers, you care about quality, you care about the environment, you care about just bringing a little beauty into your customers' lives, you care about efficiency, you tell me what those values are, whatever they are, if they are not encoded into both the operating system, the business model, and the culture of the company, but also protected in the legal documents, in the structure of the company, then ultimately no decision you make as a leader is going to matter because you won't be the one making it.
Hello, hello. Well, hello. I've got my scripted opening remarks here, and then we'll open up for conversational fun. So, welcome to this evening's program with Eric Ries, entrepreneur and author of Incorruptible by Why Good Companies Go Bad and How Great Companies Stay Great. I'm Scott Cook, co-founder and chairman of the executive committee at Intuit. Now, we have a few reminders before we get started. This is being recorded for broadcast, so please turn your phones off or at least in silent mode. And if you have questions during the evening for our speaker, please fill out the cards that are at your seat or ask them through the YouTube chat. And with that, we begin. Now, Eric, where's my question list? You grew up in San Diego, and there's not much written about your youth. So maybe you could enlighten us with some story that most folks don't know about your young years.
Okay, sure. First of all, thanks everybody for coming, and thank you, Scott, for doing this. It's always a pleasure to get a chance to hang out. Okay, San Diego. So what you have to understand about my childhood is that my parents are doctors. I come from a long line of doctors in the family, and that's considered a reputable profession to have. This is not. So it was hard. It was hard for my parents. I grew up programming computers, in the parents' basement. That's all I wanted to do instead of being outside and playing nice with the other kids. That's my parents probably would have preferred. And I'll make a long story short, but I talked my way in on the very early internet. For those who remember Usenet, I would apply for programming jobs on Usenet, because in those days on the internet, no one knows you're a dog, if you know that old famous cartoon. I was like, that's great. That means that no one will know. And most places would ask me for a resume, and then that was the end of it. Too bad for me. But there was a publisher that was writing a technical book called The Black Art of Java Game Programming. And they had an author drop out at the last moment. And so they were really desperate for a new author. So instead of asking me for a resume, they asked me for a sample chapter. And I said, great, on what topic? Whatever topic it is, I'm an expert in that. No problem. And when you're in high school, like cramming for a paper, on an arbitrary topic that you know nothing about, that's actually one of the few things you're good at that age. So I was like, no problem. And they said, well, we need, 20 pages on client-server networking. And I was like, whatever that is, for sure. I can produce it. And God bless them, they hired me to do this job. And that was actually my first like paid programming job, was actually writing. And it turned out that I was a pretty good teacher of those topics, because I was learning right along with the reader. And I'd be like, you might be confused about this, but don't worry, because I can help you out. So that was my entree into this world, was actually not through the Lean Startup, which is how I'm mostly known today, but actually through a rare find, The Black Art of Java Game Programming.
And so that means your first book was published while you were in high school.
Yes, exactly right.
Got it. And then you went to Yale, where there you founded a startup.
Yeah, unfortunately.
And then we'll skip over that then.
Yeah.
And then you moved back to the Bay Area. And you've been in the Bay Area for how long now?
Gosh, that would have been 2001, at the tail end of the dot-com bubble.
Yeah.
I've been there.
Okay.
That's now 25 years.
It's only up from there, I guess.
Definitely came at the right time.
Now, we've known each other I was trying to figure out how many years. It was pre the Lean Startup, late 2000s.
Yeah.
I saw a video of you talking about your ideas online, and I said, oh my God, got to get this guy to come speak to our company and teach us. And you did?
I remember that very well, and I'll tell you how the story played out from my perspective. Because here's what had happened. I had given a talk, one of the very first big talks I had given about Lean Startup, before the book, before anything. And it was a big success as a talk, but it wasn't, in those days, talks were not routinely filmed and put on YouTube. So what you recall is actually not a video. There was somebody in the audience with a bootleg recording device, like an early iPhone, voice memo, hit record, and he's just holding it up. And he put the audio online on a site called SlideShare, for those that remember, with the slides. And that was like this bootleg copy of my talk that had gone around. Now, I didn't know any of this had happened. I just gave the talk and it was done. And I got a call, from someone I was working with at the time, and they said, Scott Cook's office would like to see you. And I was like, oh no. what kind of trouble am I in now? This was the first time anything like this had happened to me. They said, yeah, he saw your bootleg recording. And I was like, I really thought I had been called into the principal's office of
we've looked
Silicon
at your
Valley.
taxes. And,
Yeah, exactly. I was like, what? Well, because I was thinking, what could he possibly want to talk to me about? And I remember that meeting very vividly because, of course, it was a big deal in my life. But you were so generous and open-minded. Here I was like a kid with this crazy idea, and I just think you were one of the first people in the world to really grasp its significance. So I was very, very grateful for that.
Yeah, and we had you come multiple times, and we're so glad. God, I learned a lot from you.
Oh, thank you.
So that that then led to the Lean Startup, the book or that you were in the process of writing. Now, I got to say, no business book, at least that I'm aware of, became common parlance and common practice as fast as the Lean Startup.
Gosh.
It seems, by my recollection, within months, I would hear in the startup community your concepts: minimum viable product, pivot, leap of faith assumptions, just became part of the fabric faster than I think any business concept I've seen.
Wow.
How did you do that?
Yeah, I wish I could say it was some kind of master plan, that I knew that was going to happen. The truth is, when anything becomes a movement, when it breaks containment and gets out into the wild, as the author, you have only very limited influence over that. I did take it very seriously. I focused very hard on making the ideas as sticky and as transmittable as I could. I remember that first talk, the one you saw the bootleg of, and I had a customer advisory board for that talk. I practiced it a ton. I was really trying to figure out, experiment with what would make sense. But I don't know, it was the financial crisis, so people were hungry for new ideas about entrepreneurship, so there was an element of good timing. And I worked very hard to try to show how these concepts related to previous concepts. So here's how it relates to customer development. Here's how it relates to lean manufacturing, to agile development, to software craftsmanship, if you remember that, to DevOps, to all these other communities that were kind of circling around similar ideas at the same time. And I think that created a lot of surface area for people to grasp onto it and make it theirs. Now, in Silicon Valley, it's such a tight community, and certainly was in those days. So I had no idea what I was signing up for when I started putting these ideas into the world, and I definitely did not expect it to leave entrepreneurship and go into larger companies and into public companies and governments and nonprofits and so many other places where people embraced the ideas and made them their own. But yeah.
Let me ask about that. So you achieved with that book the author's dream. New York Times bestseller list, sold over 1 million copies.
Yeah.
It became taught in business schools. It became a movement. Suddenly your calendar filled up with giant corporations and governments bidding for your time to advise them.
Yeah.
You'd made it. You were getting the big bucks. How did that feel?
It was fun. It was really fun. Okay, just to be super clear, it's very fun that all these fancy and important people like Scott and so many other people cared what I had to say. From the kid in the programming computer in the basement to feel like this somehow turned into something legitimate. And I think for my parents, the doctors, the first time they saw me on the cover of a magazine, I think for them that was like, oh, I guess it's a thing. Do we have magazines with covers anymore? I don't know. I'm not even sure that's a thing you can do anymore, but at that time, that was still a thing you could do. And so it was really fun. But I never really wanted to do that for a living. So I enjoyed being a consultant, and I enjoyed like the intellectual challenge of taking these ideas into more and more and more arcane environments that were so different from software, so different from anything I had done before. I remember working on a deep sea oil rig project, or working on a cure for cancer, or working in all kinds of government, even like defense applications, all kinds of crazy stuff. And but I always had this feeling like I'll do that as long as I'm having an impact with it. But if it becomes something that I'm having to do like routinely and turn into like a consulting company and like a big enterprise, I had this feeling like that would be a trap, that I'd be stuck just talking about this one idea for the rest of my life. And I talked to a lot of other authors who gave me great advice about how dangerous it can be if your whole life becomes about that one thing. So I had a kind of a love-hate relationship with it, where I wanted to do it as long as I felt like I was really learning and growing, but I didn't want it to be my whole life.
Well, then something happened, and suddenly you had a new quest.
Yeah.
Which leads us to today. How did that begin?
So, for me, it's always felt like one thing, honestly. I've wanted to help people create great companies and build like tremendous organizations. And so part of the answer to your question is I've just been trying to do that this whole time. And I've had the enormous privilege to be around an incredible amount of wealth creation, incredible amount of value creation, so many great companies. But I've also been around the dark side of this business. You've seen it too. So many of these companies that started out really incredible get ruined. They are destroyed. They lose their soul. I was at dinner not that long ago with a group of friends, and we went to a restaurant we hadn't been to, and one of the person who recommended hadn't been there in a few years, was I recommend we go to this place. We go to have the dinner, and we sit down, and they're on their phone, kind of being rude. I'm like, what? We're having dinner. Why are you on your phone? Just they're like, one sec. Yeah, sorry, guys. They had like taken one bite of their food and got on the phone. Like, yeah, this place was taken over by private equity. I could taste it. And we go to a different restaurant the next night, and a different person had recommended it, and they got their phone out, and they're like, is it the same damn private equity fund? No, it was a different fund, but the food had that same disgusting flavor. Have you tasted it? You know what I'm talking about? Now, I want to really I'll answer your question, I promise, but I really want to point this out. You would think that sometimes, with their vast financial resources, the new owners would make the food taste better. Anyone had that experience? Yeah, so something is going on, and we see that, of course, I'm breaking fun of private equity, but we see that when companies go public so often, when they get acquired, even when they bring in new leadership, new rounds of funding, there's this gravitational pull away from quality, away from being of service, and eventually away from financial success. So I got to watch that up close over and over and over again, and I kind of got sick and tired of it. And so I've tried in a variety of ways to address that problem. I created a new stock exchange, the long-term stock exchange, trying to bring that the idea of long-term thinking back into our public markets. And in the course of doing that work and working with so many companies, I started to kind of involuntarily acquire this new body of knowledge about corporate governance, about finance, about the best practices, about how companies are supposed to be structured and governed. And spoiler alert, it's really bad. Like that whole body of knowledge has, I think, like pretty profound errors in it. And so, yeah, like that, if you think about like when did the quest begin, at a certain point it just hit me. I'm trying to explain something to people that they don't understand. I'm running out of language for this. Like when this thing happens to your favorite brand, what do you call it? We don't even have a word for it. Is it mission drift, like a navigation error? Is it bureaucracy? No, it's something much worse. And so I started to go back into that process, which when I look back on it now, it's very similar to what happened with Lean Startup. Trying to pull on all these different threads of research and stories and concepts to try to figure out like how do we talk about this and then how do we reason about it? Although of course I wasn't really aware that that was happening at the time. And that's ultimately what led to the book.
Your book is Incorruptible, is astounding in multiple ways. One way is some sections are so supported by deep academic research that you bring together. But another element is the stories. Tell us one of the stories, scare us with how things could go bad for a great company.
I got the spooky stories for you. For the entrepreneurs in the room, I got you covered. Yeah, the book has a lot of dark stories in it. Okay, well, certainly one of my favorite stories in the book, because it takes place in San Diego, where I grew up, so I had a kind of a front row seat to elements of this, as a consumer. How many people in the audience know Saul Price? Anyone remember Saul Price, the entrepreneur? Yeah, okay. See, his legend, I think, has kind of fallen out of pop culture to a degree that I think is too bad. Saul is widely seen as the father of modern retail. So to get a sense of how influential he was, when Sam Walton was thinking of getting into retail, he named his company Walmart as an intentional tribute to Saul's company, FedMart. FedMart was a company that Saul started in the 1950s. He had trained as a lawyer before he became an entrepreneur. And as a lawyer, he was trained. He had to treat his customer as a fiduciary, meaning I put the customer's interest before my own, the client's interest before my own. That's what we all want from a lawyer. When he became a retailer, he asked himself, who's my client? And to him, it was very obvious that the customer was his client. So he practiced a philosophy of business he called being a fiduciary to the customer. To give you one example, although there are many of these funny Saul stories, when his competitors would try to undercut him on price by doing the loss leader strategy, selling products below cost to drive customers out of his store so that they could drive him out of business so that then they could jack the prices up later. You've heard of it? Okay, when they would do that, he would post their Sunday circulars up in his own store, being like, don't buy this product from me. You can get it cheaper from these idiots down the street. And he would send customers to buy it because he's like, look, I'm your fiduciary. If I can get you a lower price somewhere else, that's my job. That's the relationship I have with you. He paid above market wages. He was an early opponent of segregation. He did so many things that are just the way we wish business would be. And of course, as a result, customers trusted FedMart. They would drive miles out of their way to shop there. He hired and promoted from within. He had incredibly high employee morale, very high customer retention, employee retention. The engine worked. And so he became a wealthy man. The company was very successful. He took it public. And of course, his investors were perfectly satisfied with that level of wealth that he created for them. And they were... Why are you laughing? How do you know, right? We're living in this every single day. We all know exactly what happened next. His investors were never, ever satisfied. No matter how much money he made for them, they would look at his business and say, but couldn't you make us more? Why do you pay your employees more than you have to pay them? You say, no, you don't understand. What do you mean I have to pay them? I want to pay my employees. That's part of why this business exists. He practiced what he called capped margins. He would not mark up an item in his store more than 14%. No more, no less. That was his ironclad rule. If the industry standard was 50%, his investors would say, but if we marked it up to 45%, we'd still have the lowest price. It's just not the way he rolled. So you can imagine over the decades of this friction got worse and worse and worse and worse. And Saul tried everything. He would bring in new investors to buy out the old investors. He would get a new board that replaced the old board. No matter what, every investor seemed like they were captured by this, what I call financial gravity. And so one day in 1975, when Saul had been building the company for more than 20 years, he comes into his office and he can't open the door because they've changed the locks on the door because he doesn't work there anymore. How many times have we seen this story? Yeah. Every entrepreneur's worst nightmare. He was fired. The board was able to bring in new leadership and, from their point of view, install the best practices of governance, of operations, of leadership in FedMart. And it all worked out great. The company grew. No, of course it didn't. It took them only 7 years to drive the company into absolute liquidation. There were no FedMart stores anymore. They were all closed in 1982. It's so much easier to destroy than to build, yeah? But I picked this story on purpose because, yes, there are a lot of sad stories in the book, but this one has a happy ending. So at least you get one with a happy ending. Because Saul was a classic entrepreneur. He took 2 weeks off after this happened to him to lick his wounds, and then he was back. He leased the office in the same building upstairs from FedMart. And he said, I'm starting again. And he created a new company called Price Club. Anyone remember Price Club? Anyone remember? Yeah, when I was a kid, we shopped at Price Club. By the way, I didn't even know that was a guy's name. Mm-hmm. I just thought it was the Low Price Club. No, Price Club was a very important retailer when I was growing up in San Diego. FedMart was already a distant memory. But today, Price Club is also not very well known because of something else that happened at the same time. One of the executives who quit in protest when Saul was fired was named Jim Sinegal. And now some of you know where the story is going. He worked for Saul at Price Club, but then he broke off to form his own company. And a few years later, his company and Saul's company were to merge, forming a company that they called Price Costco. But we just call Costco. See, I gave you the deep cut backstory of the founding of Costco you didn't even know, because this story is not as well known today as it should be. Today, Costco is a $400 billion public company and widely considered to be the exception to every rule in business. So you'll even meet people sometimes who will say, this corruption of good companies is inevitable. Once they get big, once there's a lot of money involved, once they're this, once they're quarterly reporting, whatever their story is, it's inevitable. Some of you have heard this, some of you maybe even believe it, yeah. Those same people will very frequently, I was listening to a lecture the other day from someone saying, only family-run companies can sustain a promise over more than a decade because of the quarterly reporting and this and that. And they're rattling off family-run company. At the end, they're like, oh, and also Costco for some reason. Anyway, moving on. I'm like, excuse me, wait, well, hold on. Costco's not family-run. Jim Sinegal is not the CEO of Costco anymore. Like, they've been going strong for 40 years. Why are they the exception? And if you want to understand the thesis of Incorruptible in one story, this is really it, because there's a certain blueprint that these exceptional companies follow that combines the ethos of Saul Price, the fiduciary to the customer, this idea about what the nature or purpose of a business is, the leadership practices that allow that ethos to be maintained, but they are combined with something else, a second dimension that I think we too often overlook. Costco is protected by what I call a governance fortress. Because I used to think, I knew Costco, many of us know it as an exceptional company. If you'd asked me a few years ago, why is Costco so special? I said, well, they've got great leadership. And they're so big, I guess they're too big for Wall Street to mess with. You're supposed to laugh. Nobody is too big for Wall Street to mess with, okay? Let that be a lesson to you. Nobody is, it's impossible to be that big. Every few years, Wall Street tries to mess with Costco and get them to abandon their ethos. One of my favorite quotes in the whole book is from a Wall Street analyst who said something like, Costco is a company that takes money that rightfully belongs to shareholders and instead invests it in improving the customer experience. That's a criticism, huh? Okay, so there is this view, in elite circles, this is called shareholder primacy, that customers, employees, communities, these are resources to be mined for the benefit of shareholders. That's the nature of a company, that's what it's for. And yet Costco can resist this pressure when FedMart could not, because it has taken certain steps to protect itself. And this protection, this kind of exoskeleton, this shell, I think is something that founders and leaders and boards and so many of us neglect to our peril.
So let's dive into decomposing several elements, not just of this story, but of the many other examples you give in the book. Let's talk about the good side of things. In FedMart's case, now Costco, and in many others, you talk about the importance of trust.
Oh, yeah.
And trust being core to the ethos in these companies. Talk about trust and how that is so crucial to success.
So I think trustworthiness is the most underrated and valuable asset in the world today. And it is a financial asset. This is what the data shows. This is there's so much academic research in favor of this. Companies that are highly trusted have lower fundraising costs. They have higher employee and customer retention. Customers are more likely to stick with you after you make a mistake. They're more likely to buy new products when you bring out a new product. The list is endless. And yet most companies do not track this asset or measure it in any way. So the reason why this is so powerful is that most companies have a management system that requires nonstop checking on people to make sure they're doing the right thing. If you read a strategy textbook, there'll be a whole chapter or more just full of just the utter disdain that most companies today don't even have a strategy because they can't communicate to their employees what to do, so their behavior is totally incoherent. Maybe at your friend's company you've heard of this? Yeah, so that is very common. But companies where there's high trust don't have this problem because trust creates automatic alignment, makes it much easier for people to understand and believe what they're being asked to do, makes them much more likely to care about the well-being of their fellow employees, of customers. The benefits go on and on and on and on. I like to visualize this this like a financial asset. Imagine it was like a giant pile of gold coins or something, Scrooge McDuck style. Okay? Companies that are trustworthy accumulate this asset and pile it up, and the pile gets bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. And then we just leave it lying around on the floor. Like our organizations are just loaded up with this asset just lying around. And then we act like stunned or surprised when people try to steal it from you. But of course, there's no vault, there's no lock, there's no doors. We just allow anybody. So if you think about, for example, in the modern system of OKRs, where managers assign a metric to every middle manager and say, look, your goal is to accomplish this. Your job is to get us more customers to the website. Your job is to make sure the customers convert. Your job is, everyone's got a specific metric. Every single employee has the option at any time to boost their own personal metric by drawing on this really valuable financial asset, by making the company a little bit less trustworthy. I can make a promise that the company can't keep, but I probably would get away with it. Yeah? So I think this view of trustworthiness as an asset allows us to solve a bunch of really difficult leadership and governance problems that today are widely viewed as intractable. When we measure everything by ROI, the trust value is not included in the ROI calculation. So in many of the stories in the book, we see situations where managers make a decision because they can see the costs, but they cannot see the benefits of being trustworthy. And so a lot of the techniques in the book are about making this valuable asset more legible so we can incorporate it into our decision-making properly.
If trust is so valuable and the success it generates, then why are there forces trying to pull that away from a company?
Yeah, so go back to FedMart. I think the investors in FedMart understood something that, as far as I can tell, Saul never understood as long as he lived. They understood that precisely because FedMart was trusted, they could get away with betraying the customers, and they wouldn't even notice. See, when you trust somebody, you don't double check. That's why it's such a valuable asset. You don't have to, people stop price shopping because everyone knows they have the lowest price. I don't need to do that anymore, but if I know that you stop checking prices, I can start to creep the price up. Jim Sinegal, founder of Costco, called it the business equivalent of taking heroin. He said, if we took $1 bottle of ketchup and charged you $1.03, we would sell the same number of bottles of ketchup. No one would even notice. If you did that across the whole store, 3% across the board price increase, we would increase our overall net income by 50%, and nobody would notice. Now, at the size that Costco is, that's a lot of net income. Can you imagine all the free revenue? So why don't they do it? He said, well, if you do it once, you're going to have to do it again and again and again and again. And next thing you know, you're not the low price leader. You don't stand for anything at all. He called that the easy way. That temptation is currently being taught in our business schools and in so many leadership and training academies and to so many board members as a best practice. We extract as much money as we can as long as we can get away from it. And ideally, we leave somebody else holding the bag. So if you look at the graph, for example, of average CEO tenure at big companies, average lifespan of public companies, average stock holding period in public companies, all those graphs look exactly the same. It's just a complete collapse over the past 40 years, from high to low in one after the other. So we are in an age of temporary organizations being led by temporary managers for the benefit of temporary owners. And then we're like, why is there a crisis of trust in our society? Well, no kidding. So I think that we have built these forces, these financial intermediaries, and so many people who have found ways that they can profit in a narrow way at the expense of the whole. And so long as if they're not held accountable for that, then it actually seems like it's very profitable on their balance sheet, when in fact, the overall practice is value destroying.
And so is this the financial gravity that you talk about?
Yeah.
That's so powerful.
It is, and I really wanted to help people see that this is a force, like a force of nature, like a physics that affects all of our lives more than we realize. Most of the discussion about leadership, including by me and by everybody, focuses on the surface level aspects of organizations that we can see and taste and touch. So org chart, business model, culture, strategy, vision. Those things are important for sure. But there is also a set of forces underneath that drag companies down. And I use the metaphor of gravity because just like the physical force, you can tell me I live on planet Earth, but I don't believe in gravity. That's okay. Gravity believes in you as it proves every time you jump up in the air bam, you're coming right back down. Organizations are the same way. We can pretend this doesn't exist, but it does. This is the system of incentives and psychological pressures that drive so much decision-making in our modern organizations. The thing you understand about gravity is it's kind of a two-step process. First step, if you've ever been in a room with a friend or someone who's meeting a super celebrity for the first time, ever seen what that's like? Where they're just like all of a sudden become absurdly obsequious, and you're like, "What happened to you, man? Like, what's going on?" If you ask them afterwards, like, "Why did you do that?" They often don't know. It wasn't their plan. They just couldn't help themselves. I've been in the room when many people have met billionaires for the first time, and it's really gross. Okay, it's really gross. You can't help it. It is a instinctive, biological, mental reflex you have to pay close attention to who has a resource you might need, and to align yourself with that person. It's okay, it happens to all of us. As an individual thing, it's gross, but it's not that harmful. But in an organizational context, it is very different, because we know from the psychology research that consistently performed behaviors eventually become internalized as values. So if you've ever been on a company that's gone public for the first time, you might remember this. What's different? People start watching the ticker very closely. In meetings, people sometimes say things like, "I don't know, the market might not like that." Might? Now, you're like, "Oh, did you go interrogate our investors to find out what they want?" No, I just think they might not like it. You notice how recently a bunch of CEOs are laying people off and claiming it's about AI? A bunch of the people that did that, their personal net worth increased by billions of dollars because the market really liked it that they did that. You think all the other executives in the market didn't notice? Oh, the market seems to like this kind of thing? Okay, let's do it. So that's gravity at work. It is an unconscious transmitter of values from those who have resources to those who want them.
Okay, so now having confronted the forces of the dark side, now let's go find our Luke Skywalker. Talk to us about the role of leaders.
Yeah, so this is very important. When people look at the FedMart or the Costco story, they see a leader who figured it out and knew what to do. And so some people say, "Oh, great, if I just have good leadership, if I just have good intentions, I'll be fine." And I tell the story in a book of a leader who came to see me for help, and he was trying to recruit some of the very best scientists in the world to join his fledgling startup, working on this really high concept AI bioscience thing. I won't get into it because it would scare you to death if you knew what it was. But very scary, but also tremendous potential of this technology. And he would have these conversations where he's asking these people to join him, and they would ask him questions he couldn't answer. They'd say, "Well, how do I know for sure that this is going to be used for long-term value creation and not to extort money from people or to do something even more deadly?" And he'd be like, "Well, don't worry, I have such good intentions." And that wasn't getting it done. Because they'd be like, "Well, okay, but aren't we going to have investors? Aren't we a for-profit company? What if they ask us to do this because they think it'll make them more money?" He'd be like, "Oh, I'll say no." And that wasn't really getting it done either. And then because they'd be like, "Well, don't the investors have the ability to replace you as the leader if they don't like what you're doing?" He's like, "Well, I'll make sure we pick investors who won't do that." How? How will you know? What if there's trillions of dollars at stake? Are you sure? It was just really an impossible situation. But when he would meet with investors, they were unbelievably condescending. They'd be like, "Oh, sweetheart, you must not be very serious about running a for-profit company if this is what you're worried about." And he's like, "What am I supposed to do? I can't tell my employees anything that they want to hear, and I can't tell investors anything that they want to hear." So this, seeing this as purely a leadership challenge, I think is not enough. We have to see this like leadership plus this other element of structure, or what is commonly called governance. So the job of the leader is first and foremost to establish the ethos, as Saul Price did. You cannot protect something unless it exists ahead of time. So structure does not cause having the right culture or values or commitments. But once you've figured out, okay, I want to make these fiduciary commitments like Saul did. I want to say it. And I don't tell anyone in the book what your values should be. Okay, you tell me. But if you have any values at all other than enriching shareholders, if you care about your employees, you care about your customers, you care about quality, you care about the environment, you care about just bringing a little beauty into your customers' lives, you care about efficiency, you tell me what those values are, whatever they are. If they are not encoded into both the operating system, the business model, and the culture of the company, but also protected in the legal documents, in the structure of the company, then ultimately no decision you make as a leader is going to matter because you won't be the one making it.
Well, let's break into those two pieces.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
First, the ethos, and then the structural reinforcement.
Yes, exactly.
Maybe tell a story of each. What's a story of a leader and a firm that established that ethos and how did it look and feel? And then maybe a different story of a different company. How did somebody else protect structurally?
Okay, all right.
Elements
That's great. Let's start with ethos. So we did Costco. Costco's a nice example because it's easy to understand. Here's one that's a little bit harder to understand. Our mutual friend Todd Park, who I actually shared this stage with the last time I had a book coming out years ago. He has a company called Devoted Health, which is a health insurance company for American seniors. Very fast-growing private company worth I don't know how many billions of dollars now. And if you ask Todd what the product is that his company makes, he will give you an answer that you will not expect from a health insurance company, because he will say, the product that we make is love, which we happen to right now embody as a combination health insurance, care delivery vehicle, and technology company. But we reserve the right to embody it as something else. And now everyone's like, wait, love, come on. I know. But this is not just some CEO's like, oh, we treat everyone like family while he's busy like stabbing them in the back. No, this is the actual operating philosophy of this company. Most of us are so cynical, so used to being screwed over by the companies we work with, we can't actually imagine what it would mean for our health insurance company to love us. Like, imagine if they actually cared about your well-being. Can you think of any ways in which their behavior might be different than what you've experienced so far in your life? You can think of one or two? Yeah, so imagine they did all those things. Would that be a competitive advantage to that health insurance company? Would you switch over to one that you felt that actual level of connection with? You might. And in fact, that has been the experience of Devoted Health. Now, this is not some like altruistic, mushy thing. This is the most ruthless business strategy in the world. And I tell a bunch of stories in the book about the ethos of Devoted Health. One example, and I try to pick examples where the customer who's had the experience is on record. Like, you can watch the YouTube video of them talking about it. One of my favorite stories in the book is from a customer of Devoted Health who had toxic mold in her apartment. And she kept being readmitted to the emergency room because of the toxic mold. It was like slowly killing her. And her previous health insurance company just paid or denied the claims. That's their job. But she switched over to Devoted Health, and she just called the customer service hotline and started talking to the customer service agent to schedule her next, whatever care it was. And the customer service agent was like, look, seems here like there's a problem that you keep being readmitted. She's like, yeah, there's toxic mold in my apartment. And the customer service agent, well, maybe you should live in a different apartment. She's like, well, yeah, good. That's a great point, but I can't afford a different apartment. This is all I can afford. And the customer service says, okay, well, let's find you a different apartment. And all of a sudden, undertook this incredible project, figuring out like low-income housing, and like got this person moved into a new apartment, basically saved her life, got her away from the toxic mold. Now, I tell you that story, and you're like, well, that must be a really nice customer service agent. No, that is the explicit instruction of every person in the company. The actual operating system of this company is to, when you are interacting with a customer, you picture the face of someone from your own family who you love and ask, if that person asked me, what would I do? And then you do that. And again, that sounds very abstract. It sounds very warm-hearted, but it's actually extremely specific. Most people find this instruction very easy to carry out. The company has tremendous alignment. They don't have that strategy textbook problem because people understand. Now, I mentioned this is a ruthless strategy. Imagine that I wanted to compete with this company. I'm going to do a private equity roll-up. You want to do my roll-up with me? We're going to go buy up a bunch of health insurance companies and care delivery vehicle. We're going to roll it up. We're going to drive the premiums down. And just like the lost leader with Saul Price, we're going to drive Devoted Health out of business. As soon as they're out of business, then we can jack up the rates. Anyone want to do this project with me? This is like a best practice in certain corners of the finance industry. Now, at Devoted Health, the thing I didn't tell you is that the customers call the customer service agents their guardian angels. That's not a company term. That's what the customers authentically do. I tell so many stories like this in the book. There's a guy who leads a prayer for Devoted every week at his church. He's referred, I think, like 150 seniors to Devoted Health. He's not compensated for this in any way. He just loves this company. So you call up Dwayne, who I told you the toxic mold story, like, hey, would you like to switch away from your guardian angel so you can save some money from my private equity roll-up? She won't even take your call. When you establish this bond of trust, when you have the true ethos of a Saul Price or a Todd Park, when you have that ethos, you literally shrink the total available market. available to your competitors by one every time you build that bond with a customer. That's ethos.
Okay, compelling story of building an ethos that then builds a business success. Now let's talk about the other half of your formula, protecting that from the forces against it. What would be a story, an example of someone who's done that and how?
Okay, so I'm going to tell you a story. I'm right now going to tell you that you're not going to believe the story because it involves this structure creating more than $500 billion of shareholder value by having a nonprofit be involved. And you're going to be like, that can't be right. So you can check the math. Here's the story. Well, if you talk to people about this inevitability, and they say, well, what are the exceptions? You will notice a pattern among the companies that get named as an exception. Like anyone here eating a Hershey chocolate bar, or you have a Patagonia fleece, some of you have a Vanguard mutual fund. Anyway, I was just in LA where everybody's taking Novo Nordisk medications. And they were really excited to hear this story. So we did a lot of Novo Nordisk when I was down in LA. And Novo Nordisk is a company that's been around for more than 100 years and yet has this real ethos of scientific research. Now, you might say, well, I guess they were really far-sighted leaders. So let me just tell you, for those who don't know the Novo Nordisk story, there's a woman named Marie Krogh, who was one of the first physicians in Denmark, like licensed physician, one of the first women to be credentialed as a physician in Denmark. She lived in the 1920s. And she was diagnosed with diabetes at a time when that was a fatal illness. There was no known cure to diabetes. It was a 100% fatal illness. Now, her husband, August, had just won the Nobel Prize. And so even though she got this fatal diagnosis, she agreed to go with him on a lecture tour of North America. So they had this terrible news and yet still decided to proceed with the tour. They went around lecturing. He was lecturing about his Nobel Prize. She was being the dutiful wife supporting him. And one night at dinner, at one of these events, another scientist at the table tells Marie that these Canadian scientists have isolated insulin for the first time, a potential cure for diabetes. Well, she's very interested. And she convinces August that they should go to Canada and meet with the scientists and see the cure for themselves, which they do. They extend their trip. They go there. They put the science through its paces, decide that it's legitimate. And they say, look, we want to bring this cure back to Denmark with us. But everybody involved had a concern. What if one day in the future they build a for-profit company to commercialize insulin? Now, if I depend on you for a life-saving medication, I want you to charge me a fair price, right? Like, I very much want you to stay in business and profit from doing this. But I would also live in fear. Scott, what if one day you woke up and you realize, wait a minute, I don't have to charge Eric a fair price. Mm-hmm. I can charge him whatever I want.
3% more. Or 30% more.
Or whatever you want, because my life depends on this medication. I have to pay you whatever you demand. So even in the 1920s, they could foresee Martin Shkreli and all these scandals we've had in our modern life. They saw this coming 100 years ago, and they said, we have to build this company in such a way that this kind of corruption is not possible. So they created what they called the Nordisk Insulin Laboratorium as a nonprofit foundation, which owned a for-profit subsidiary. It's called the Industrial Foundation structure, and it's not that uncommon. Like I mentioned, a bunch of companies have this structure, even though you probably didn't realize it the last time you shopped at an IKEA. They have a structure. So anyway, I remember the first time I met a company that had this structure. They're called Grundfos. They make most of the water pumps in the world. And I was doing a lean startup lecture, just like we did back at Intuit. You know, they'd asked me to come over to Denmark, and I gave them the lecture. And I was just asking questions. Oh, what's it like? But why are you different from your competitors? They said, well, we're owned by this nonprofit foundation. And I was like, oh, I'm so sorry. That must be rough. And they're like, oh, why? It's like, oh, I guess you can't follow the best practices. You can't, you must not be globally competitive. You can't raise money in our capital markets. You don't have the discipline of investors to discipline you for efficiency. I was regurgitating the same nonsense we still teach in our business schools today. And they laughed so much harder than you are laughing right now. They thought I was the dumbest person they had ever met. And they were like, we wouldn't trade this structure for conventional best practices for all the money in the world. And I was like, oh, that's interesting, because imagine if you went to a VC right now today or called your lawyer and said, I heard from Eric there's this industrial foundation structure. I want to do that for my startup. Would they be like, oh, yeah, that's lasted 100 years I'm sure that will be great for you. No, they wouldn't. They'd be like, what are you talking about? That's crazy. And yet this structure is so common in the world today that it comprises a data set. You can add up all the companies that have this structure in the world, and you can ask questions like, well, how do they perform on average compared to our so-called best practices. And by whatever measure you choose, they are at least as good or in many cases better. They're more efficient, they invest countercyclically. They are 5 times more likely to live to year 50 than companies with a conventional structure. So anyway, the Krogs worked this out in the 1920s, and it has endured all this time. Now, Novo Nordisk in particular is a public company. They're a huge public company, one of the largest in Europe. And in the early 2000s, they were going through a bunch of restructuring, like a lot of people in pharma were. And the for-profit subsidiary has its own independent board. So the key to this structure is the 2-entity system, a checks and balances between the trustees who oversee the mission and the for-profit board who oversee the business. The for-profit board decides they want to sell Novo Nordisk. They actually went and got a signed merger agreement with an even bigger pharma company. They said, look, this is the new best practice in pharma. It's eat or be eaten. We got to get bigger. And they kind of viewed it like one of the last due diligence checklist items they had to do to consummate this merger. They had to go to this nonprofit, to the trustees, and be like, look, we just need you to sign off on this thing real quick, if you don't mind. And the trustees were like, oh, that's great, but let me ask you this question. What is the purpose of this transaction? And they're like, we're getting a gigantic premium over the share price. We're all about to make so much money. They're like, I know, but our mission is to, like, our responsibility is to oversee the mission. What would be the impact on this, on the mission of Novo Nordisk? And they're like, we got to get back to you. My favorite detail of this whole story is that they had to have 2 meetings. They actually, you can see this meeting went really badly. They were not prepared. They went and they had a second meeting. They got their bankers and everybody, and they're like, okay, you said in the first meeting that you can only approve a transaction like this if it is necessary for the continued thriving of Novo Nordisk. But here's the new best practice in pharma. We got to eat or be eaten. If we don't get bigger, we're going to blah, blah, blah. And again, the trustees were like, okay, but we've been profitable and growing like 15% a year for 10 years in a row. What problem are you trying to solve by doing this transaction? And they're like, but look at the dump trucks full of money that they're driving up to our house. They had this point of mutual incomprehension, and the foundation said no. We just won't do this transaction. We won't approve it. Everyone was so pissed. Can you imagine? Everyone's payday is deferred. They just said no. They had the absolute power to say no, and they did. Now, it's rare in business that we have the counterfactual. We actually know exactly what would have happened if they said yes. But in this case, we do. Because the company that they were going to merge with itself was sold to Merck 2 years later. And Merck promptly shut down all their R&D. Now, I mentioned before the drugs that are real popular in Los Angeles. That research program was in years, I think, 13 of 15 of its utterly fruitless research program until they finally figured out how to make Ozempic and those drugs, the GLP-1 class of drugs, work. So we know for sure if they had done this transaction, that research would not have been consummated. Now, for those that don't know, GLP-1 is the most profitable pharmaceutical in the history of humanity. And if you freeze frame the story on the day when the market cap of Novo Nordisk exceeded the GDP of Denmark and ask how much value was created by these nonprofit trustees interrupting this transaction, the answer is more than $500 billion. So next time someone tells you that you couldn't possibly entrust something as important as being a good steward of investor money or whatever into a set of nonprofit trustees, you could be like, is $500 billion not enough for you? You want a little more? Like that is the power of mission guardianship.
Well, let's go to audience questions.
Oh, yeah. Oh, I'm excited.
What would need to be true for Anthropic to be incorruptible?
I didn't pay anyone to ask me this question, right? Because, of course, Anthropic is chapter 11 in the book. And you can read the whole story because, of course, this is the company that's on everybody's mind right now. And I played a very bit part in the story. Okay, I just want to be super clear for the record. I am not taking credit for Anthropic's incredible success. All credit to Dario and Danielle and the whole team. Okay, I did not cause this to happen. But I did meet with them when they left OpenAI. This is, by my count, 3 or 4 OpenAI crises ago. I'm not sure which one. Anyway, there was a crisis where a bunch of people left OpenAI, and they are the founders. They went to found Anthropic because they were concerned about the AI safety mission. And again, all credit to them. They foresaw that if this technology worked, it would be worth trillions of dollars. And can you imagine the pressure that they're under now? This technology is so valuable. You have every public company and every sovereign nation state wants to control it. So they foresaw the need for protection from those kinds of pressures, and we worked together on that. Anthropic is what's called a public benefit corp. They have written their fiduciary commitments into the charter of the company. And they also went further. They also have that 2-tiered ownership structure that I was talking about. They are governed by something called the Long-Term Benefit Trust. It's not a nonprofit foundation. It's actually technically what's called a perpetual purpose trust under Delaware law. We can get into it. If there are further questions, we can talk about how the structure works. But they took this really seriously, and they didn't just want to be emperors for life like a lot of founders are, but they wanted the mission to be protected structurally in itself. Now, when I started writing this book, Anthropic was not a very well-known company. And it was very challenging to write as up until the day the book was printed, I was revising it every single day with the latest news about Anthropic. So I didn't know, of course, what was going to happen next. And of course, it's been really interesting to see them become just so very prominent. And it's much too early to say whether the structure will be strong enough to hold. At the end of the day, they have to make the tough calls here. But I think the early returns seem pretty promising.
So Anthropic has basically drank at the well of your advice. Too early to say. What are just a list of some other examples of companies who've put in the kinds of structures and systems that you advocate in the book?
Gosh, there's so many. Let's talk about Tony's Chocolonely. Anyone seen Tony's Chocolonely in a grocery store recently? Yeah, exactly. We got some fans here. Tony's is some of the most delicious chocolate in the world. I like Tony's because, first of all, they do all the things. They have what's called a mission lock vehicle called Tony's Mission Lock. They've open sourced the whole thing. You can go to tonysmissionlock.org and you can read all the documents. But most people who've eaten the chocolate don't know the origin story of the company. So the founder of Tony's Chocolonely, he tried to get himself arrested for eating chocolate. That's the kind of person he was, okay? He is a photojournalist. He had done a big expose in the Netherlands about child slavery in the production of cocoa. And nobody cared. It was a fine piece. People were like, oh, that's very nice. And they went back to eating the chocolate. And he kept trying to draw attention to the fact that every time you eat chocolate produced in conventional ways, you're contributing to child labor in these brutal conditions. And so he went to the authorities and said, look, I don't understand. If child labor is illegal, and I eat chocolate, and chocolate causes child labor, then why are you not arresting me for child labor violations? And they were like, dude, if we arrested you, we'd have to arrest every person in the Netherlands. He's like, that's my point. That's what I'm requesting that you do. Now, you might be shocked to learn that the authorities declined to prosecute for this crime. And so he was like, it's such a great MVP story, actually, because he was so frustrated with this. He asked everybody, why does nobody care? And they said, the consumers just don't care. They only want the chocolate. Whatever the consequences of that product are, they just don't care. And he's like, I just don't believe that. So he announced that he and his TV production team were going to produce, I think it was 5,000 fair trade chocolate bars on their own. They didn't know anything about chocolate. They're like, we'll figure it out. And they put them on the website for sale, and they sold 15,000 immediately, far more than they had any ability to build. And every time they did these experiments where they would offer consumers a choice, not to sacrifice anything. Tony's chocolate is delicious. The bars are 18% bigger than conventional bars. They're better in a lot of ways. It has the cool branding and packaging. Now that I've mentioned it, you're going to start to notice it in Whole Foods every time you go by. They put the lie to the fact that consumers don't care. And this is true in so many business categories where it just requires someone with the courage and the conviction to say, we're going to do this. Now, just like Todd Park, remember what I said, what is the product of Devoted Health? And he said, love. Tony's Chocolonely is not a chocolate company. Their mission is to eradicate child slavery in the production of cacao beans. And they take that incredibly seriously. I won't get into all the things that they do. They do a lot of good stuff, but they not only do that in their own supply chain, they have this thing they call Tony's Open Chain, where they allow other companies to license their supply chain from them. For example, if you or maybe some of your kids have eaten a Mr. Beast Feastables chocolate, that's Tony's Chocolonely chocolate. It doesn't say that on the packaging. Mr. Beast doesn't mention that. He just takes credit for the ethical and delicious aspects of the chocolate. But that's okay with them. They don't mind that. But the key is, if you want to use their supply chain, you have to abide by what they call the no cherry picking rule. All of your chocolate has to abide by their principles, or you can't use it. So though they are relatively small in the grand scheme of global chocolate, they are the #1 chocolate provider in the Netherlands now. They're climbing in most countries. Yet they have this far vaster impact because they focus on something in the book I call mission transmission. They understand that the goal is not just to see the mission carried out by my narrow company and my customers, but rather they see themselves expansively as the truly great companies have, as Costco does, as Toyota very famously did. They want to see their values spread through the entire value chain that they touch.
Okay. You've been critical of two things. Tell us why. One is the ESG movement,
True.
and the other is the ISS and the governance movement.
ISS shows up as kind of like a repeat villain in the book, like for brief moments, because for those that don't know, ISS is the ratings agency that has to rate companies based on whether they have good governance or bad governance. Their ratings are extremely influential. There are trillions of dollars that blindly follow their recommendations, no matter what. And so all of your favorite companies like Costco routinely get the worst possible governance scores from ISS. It's almost a running joke among CEOs to be like, who makes up these scores? It's unbelievable. In the endnotes, if you check, ISS is one of several groups where I did the hard work of reading their actual governance guidelines, so you don't have to. But if you ever want to, you can just click the link in the endnotes. You can go to the PDF. All you have to do is say Command F and type the word mission. It will not appear in the document. Mission is not considered to be one of the elements of good governance, according to our current governance class as embodied by these folks. And this is also the problem in the ESG movement. In order to get a high governance score, companies have to be weak to pressure from the outside. But how can you be for environmental sustainability if you're going to be weak to what investors randomly want you to do? It's an absolute contradiction in terms. So I don't deplore the goals of the ESG movement. I think the fact that customers are pouring money, even now, into ESG funds shows that just like with Tony's, people don't want, none of us really want our retirement savings used to fund atrocious things. We want to have companies that actually can think long-term, that can act like good corporate citizens. I think that's like a very profound desire, especially among younger generations. But the ESG movement, because it has gotten enmeshed in this good governance nonsense, has made that basically impossible. I'll give you one other little factoid from the book. Since 2008, so that's a not insignificant sample now, since 2008, among public companies that have been rated by a governance ratings agency, companies that are rated to have bad governance have outperformed companies rated to have good governance. So who is this for? Yeah.
What characteristics are needed to create a trusting persona? What are the actions one should take to develop trust?
Oh, I really like this question. I want to do just a quick little history lesson because one of my favorite things about the book is I got to bring awareness to a new generation of people of a very important management thinker who was basically erased from history. Her name was Mary Parker Follett. Any Mary Parker Follett fans in the room? Hey, we got a couple. Yes. Okay, good. Right. So for those who know Frederick Winslow Taylor, he's a little more famous. Yeah, you've heard of him. She was a contemporary of Taylor, and whereas Taylorism preached rigid conformity to hierarchy and basically treating workers like automatons, he would have loved generative AI, let me tell you. Follett, her ideas were so far ahead of their time that I'm going to tell you a couple of them right now, and for each one I want you to think, if you saw that on TikTok, as like an aphorism with a cool video behind it, would you be like, oh yeah, that makes sense? Yes, of course that's something that someone just said like 2 days ago. No, these are from the 1920s, okay? She talked about power with, not power over. She said the responsibility of a leader is to create more leaders. Come on, that is TikTok worthy for sure. She said, so she was asked once, should the subordinate obey the superior? And she said, no. The subordinate and the superior together obey what she called the law of the situation. They work together to figure out what the situation requires, and they do that. And her most important concept is something she called the invisible leader. She would drive her contemporaries absolutely crazy because she would do stuff like this. Someone would ask her, like, tell me about a great leader that you really like. And she would say, yes, Mr. Roundtree, the owner of the Roundtree Chocolate Factory. And they'd be like, great, what's so great about him? She said, well, hold on. Mr. Roundtree, the owner of the Roundtree Chocolate Factory, is not the leader of the Roundtree Chocolate Factory. There's a lot of chocolate in this book for some reason. Sure why. Anyway, people would be like, lady, his name is right there on the door. His family owns the factory. Everyone works for him. Like, in what possible universe, if he's not the leader, who is? She said, well, he is a really good leader. I do admire him greatly. But that's because he is so gifted at instilling in his employees a sense of common purpose. And the common purpose that they understand is, in fact, their invisible leader and not Mr. Roundtree himself. And if you understand this one idea, you will see how to build trust. It's a principle in the book I call harder is easier. If we make sure that every person in the organization truly understands what our goals are. Like, what are we really trying to accomplish at the level of human beings? In the book, I advocate that we should define being a for-profit company as one that attempts to maximize human flourishing. That's what it means to make a profit. So if our employees understand that, then they will constantly find themselves in a situation where that makes their life a lot more difficult. Let's give an example. Oh, let's do the Costco hot dog. Everyone knows the famous Costco hot dog story, and some people do, some people don't. Okay, just so you know, very quickly, since 1986, Costco has been selling a hot dog and soda combo outside of its stores. From a food truck, it cost $1.50 in 1986. For comparison, a McDonald's Big Mac at that time in California cost $1.60. Today, if you've tried to buy a Big Mac recently, you'll know they're almost $7 here in California. The Costco hot dog and soda combo is still $1.50 after all these years. Now, you cannot imagine the amount of difficulty it has taken Costco to keep this price at $1.50. Because remember, they still follow the salt price ethos of capped margins. This is not a loss leader. They have to make money on this freaking hot dog. Anyway, this hot dog is so famous because of something that happened in 2008. The then COO of Costco, who would later go on to become CEO, went to Jim Sinegal, the then CEO and founder, and said, "Boss, we're getting our butts kicked by this hot dog. We're going to have to raise the price." And what Sinegal said next is so famous, you could actually buy a T-shirt with this printed on it. Okay, it's a very famous story. He said, "If you raise the price of the effing hot dog, I will kill you." So figure it out. Okay, this is harder is easier thinking at work. Yes, it is way harder. Like Costco's had to vertically integrate its hot dog supply chain. They actually own and operate their own hot dog production factories. It's been a lot of extra work, all for the privilege of not making extra money from the hot dog. Just so you know, how many hot dogs they sell from this cart? More than all Major League Baseball stadiums combined. They sell a lot of hot dogs. So if they could add $1 to that price, they would make a lot of free money, but they don't do it because this is how you build trust. You make a promise, and then you act in a principled way in defense of that promise in ways large and small. Remember Steve Jobs? One of my favorite Steve Jobs stories was the time that he got into a big fight with his engineers about the visual layout of the cables inside a computer he didn't think customers should be allowed to open the case of. And his engineers would be like, "Steve, who cares? You yourself have decreed that customers will never see this case, so no one will ever know." And he's like, "Yeah, but we'll know. Mm-hmm. We'll know. And if you believe in design, then you got to believe in it all the way in ways large and small." So this principle of taking the harder road on purpose is the thing that allows companies to generate this trustworthiness asset.
This is a question from one of our YouTube viewers.
Awesome.
If governance is the structure that resists the gravity, mm-hmm. what's the operational layer, the daily practice that makes the values real enough to be worth protecting? And who owns that, in your view?
Oh, what a great question! These are really good questions. And I've been doing a lot of events, so I've gotten a lot of questions. They're not always this good. So there's a concept in the book. The book is, if you think about the blueprint of how we're going to create incorruptible companies, like I said before, it's half ethos, half structure. So this is on the operational side, the ethos side. One of the really key concepts in the book is what I call the culture bank. And it's very important to visualize and communicate about trustworthiness as a financial asset, which means we have to think of it like a deposit in a bank account. So I said before, when you defend a principle, that's like you're literally making a deposit. So what's an example of a deposit in a culture bank? I tell the story in the book of H-E-B, the grocery store in Texas. There was once an ice storm in Texas that shut the power down in a store. And all the customers are like groaning, like, "Oh no." Why are they groaning? Why are they in a grocery store in an ice storm? They're obviously all stocking up for things they're gonna need. Why are they groaning? The point of sale system is down. Nobody can pay for their stuff. They're not gonna get the things they need for their family, right? You've ever been in this situation? The store manager jumps up on a counter and says, "Hey everybody, just let you know, can't charge you any money, so just take your stuff and go." Remember, just take your cart, roll it right out the store. Customers were in tears because here's a store that's like, "Look, taking care of you is our responsibility." And think about this, again, we talked about ROI. The trust that this action generated does not show up in the ROI calculation, but the cost can be calculated down to the penny. We know exactly how much every item that walked out the door is worth. But what's that trust worth? So that's an example of making a deposit in the culture bank. When you do the opposite, when you take the short and easy route, then you're making a withdrawal from the culture bank. In the book, I teach something I call the Todd Park rule, after our friend, the founder of Devoted Health. He once taught it to me this way. He said, look, it's very simple, actually. The rule is, if you want people to trust you, only make deposits, never make withdrawals. Simple. And the late, great Clay Christensen, who we both admire so much, he said in one of his last books that it is easier to do the right thing 100% of the time than it is to do it 98% of the time. By having a crisp and clear rule, you make life so much easier for yourself and all your employees. Now, everyone hears this for the first time, and they're like, but Eric, that's too hard. That's why harder is easier first. Because it is hard. It's a lot more difficult. There will be lots of situations where you will be tempted to make the compromise. But if you really understand the power of ethos, you really understand the power of trust, you will use this tool to teach your employees, to empower your employees to defend the ethos against anybody wielding a spreadsheet trying to convince them differently. And to answer the second part of the question, who should do this work? In the book, I advocate for the creation of something I call the Department of Corporate Purpose. I think if it's nobody's responsibility, then it won't happen. We have to centralize that responsibility, and I work out in the book the details of how that should happen. So I hope some people will give it a try.
A quick closing comment. For information about Commonwealth Club World Affairs membership and upcoming programs, please visit commonwealthclub.org. Eric will be available for signing books right after this program.
Oh, good.
So please join me in thanking Eric Ries, author of Incorruptible.
Oh, thank you all so much. Thank you, Phil. Awesome. Good to see you. Thank you so much.